Zach Wilson's going to take the slings and arrows that come in his direction. There's a lot of sort of talk about, this defense playing out of its mind. They were just trying to stay alive so that Aaron Rodgers could complete this improbable comeback and, take them to the promised land. Is the elephant in the room not, it doesn't matter if he's back or not. This offensive line is so bad, he can't survive even if he comes back.
No, I actually don't. I don't think that way. Now the offensive line has been bad. Okay, like Billy Turner was bad at right tackle last night. The injuries and everything have kind of decimated this offensive line. I'm not trying to say that the offensive line is good, but with how good this defense is for the New York Jets, this is a team that's competing for the 1 seed in the playoffs if he's healthy. I fully believe that that's the case. I looked it up earlier this morning. These are the numbers on the Jets defense 8 games into the season. They are first in PFF defensive overall grade. They are first in coverage grade as a team, 6th in run defense grade as a team, 2nd in total pressures, 4th in pass rush win percentage, 6th in total EPA per play allowed. This group, top to bottom, all 3 layers, completely elite. It is one of the best defenses in the NFL. And even if you give Aaron Rodgers, a fully healthy Aaron Rodgers, of course, not
right,
him coming off of an Achilles injury as fast as he would need to make a difference this season, it's kind of a different conversation. But if he never gets hurt, even if you give me the exact same offensive line performance that the Jets had last night, I think they'd probably win that game, because there were plenty of moments where Zach Wilson had enough time to do something with the ball, and there were a handful of times where Zach Wilson did something good with the ball. Imagine how many more times that happens with Aaron Rodgers. Imagine how faster the ball comes out of his hands, where it goes exactly where it needs to go. You're completing drives, you're completing first downs, you're doing all that kinds of stuff. I really do believe that even with the Jets' offensive line woes, if Aaron Rodgers is this team's quarterback, they're in the conversation for the number 1 seed in the AFC East, or in the AFC, because the defense is just that good. And that was my takeaway from last night after watching that team.
Man, I don't know. I agree with you. I think their defense is incredible. I mean, you look at some of the numbers from their pass rush last night. They are insane. I mean, they had, 5 sacks? 4 of them came on just 4-man rushes. I think the 5th was a 3-man rush. Jermaine Johnson, who was first-round pick a year ago, the 3rd first-round pick, was sort of underwhelming as a rookie, more of a run defender than a pass rusher. I mean, he's really kicked on this year, led the team in pressures with 9. John Franklin Myers had 8. Bryce Huff had 7. Quinnen Williams had 6. And then you got Will McDonald getting 2 pressures, including a sack, on 6 pass rushing snaps. Solomon Thomas getting 2 pressures, including a sack, on 7 pass rushing snaps. I mean, their pass rush is insane. It's only using the front 4. It's a dominant defense, and on the back end, you've got DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner playing amazingly. I agree. It's an incredible defense, but you go to the other side of the ball and that offensive line, and Billy Turner gave up 10 pressures. That's insane.
It wasn't a good night.
Right.
It was not a good night for him.
Laken Tomlinson gave up 8 pressures. Max Mitchell gave up 5. Mekhi Becton gave up 5. Joe Tippmann, the center, and centers tend not to give up pressure, gave up 3. Aaron Rodgers lasted 4 snaps or whatever it was. It's difficult to get anything from that. But all of them, he was under pressure, right? In week 1, when they had a healthier offensive line, sure, he was holding onto the ball. They were a quick game. It's not necessarily the offensive line's fault. But I feel like this offensive line is a terminal problem no matter who the quarterback is. Of course, Aaron Rodgers makes it look better than Zach Wilson. But I kind of feel that the great hope that they've been pinning this season on is if we can just stay alive till mid-December,
right.
Rodgers rides in on his white horse and saves everything. I can't see how that works at the moment.
I think I think it's kind of 2 different conversations between if Rodgers never got hurt and if Rodgers is going to come back within 4 months from tearing his Achilles. I think that those are 2 different things, because Rodgers never getting hurt deals with pressure in the offensive line in a different way than him being on 1.5 legs, even if he comes back sometime in December to try to save the season. So I do think that's a little bit different of a conversation, but I really, again, I understand where the offensive line is at. It's not good, but Rodgers takes what Wilson has been able to do and multiplies it by a lot because of who he is and because of who Zach Wilson has been. And so even with the bad offensive line play, I don't think it's, I'm not saying that they would be contenders to win the Super Bowl, but win enough regular season games to where they're earning a high seed in the playoffs, potentially even the number one overall seed because of how well that defense is playing. And if Aaron Rodgers could play pretty risk averse, then I think that they win a lot of damn football games in this regular season. That's why the injury sucks. I don't think the offensive line is good enough to where once the Jets were to get in the playoffs, whether it was the one seed or wherever else, you're going up against too many teams that are going to frustrate you in too many different ways where it would have held them back from the ultimate goal. But this team's absolutely 100% a playoff team. They're hosting a playoff game if Aaron Rodgers never gets healthy. And I really do believe that even with the offensive line like I saw it last night.
So let me ask you one more question before we talk about the Chargers a little bit. The Jets, they played this quarterback thing slightly strangely this season because, okay, Rodgers goes down, you're stuck with Zach Wilson. There's very little you can do to fix that, right? The talk was Kirk Cousins. The talk, like everyone had these sort of massive dreams of crazy things, but like Rodgers is still there. They expect him back, even if it's not this year, next year. You can't just go and get a new franchise quarterback midseason. You're kind of stuck with the situation you were. And yet it's clear to everybody that Zach Wilson is not going to be the guy there. He's probably not even going to be the guy that can keep this thing alive, above water. And we just saw what happened when the Minnesota Vikings trade almost nothing to bring in Josh Dobbs within a week, who goes out there and through scrambling and ad-libbing and just playing sandlot football, essentially, is able to win a game. Like, should the Jets have flipped a nothing pick to Arizona to bring in Josh Dobbs because that's a better option than Zach Wilson?
Yeah, I think that the answer is yes, certainly in hindsight. I try to think about where the Jets were at when Rodgers got hurt, and not only were they shell-shocked, and I think that it's all right to just to accept that and kind of understand how shell-shocked they were going all in for Aaron Rodgers, then him getting hurt on the fourth play of the game. I mean, I think that it was just a lot that they were trying to process during that time, especially since the season had immediately begun. Like, it's not like they had the opportunity to get the guy in there for a couple of training camp practices and things like that. They had their hands full on the offensive line anyway, so they knew that it was going to be a little bit of an uphill climb, even if it was Rodgers behind that O-line. So when I try to put myself in a realistic seat of what the Jets were thinking about, I wonder if they wanted to play Wilson this entire year no matter what, because of two reasons. One, they did not want to allocate any other draft picks or cap space to the quarterback position, which was normally a more costly one when you talk about bringing somebody from the outside in. They didn't want to spend any more money in that regard because they didn't want to have to kick the can down the road anymore. And I also wonder if they wanted to increase Wilson's trade value. Like, I wonder if they wanted him to play this year, knowing that the defense is going to be good enough to win them a handful of games. And if Wilson played well, sure, maybe they make the playoffs as a wild card. I think that probably would have been best case scenario. But even if they didn't, if they got around 500 at the end of the year, would Wilson have played well enough to next offseason, they say, hey, somebody give us a second round pick or a third round pick for this guy? And to me, maybe that was their plan because they were going to move on from him all along. And that has clearly backfired. And if you go out and you get another quarterback and you bench Zach Wilson at any point in time, all of that is gone. Like, all of that is out the window. Like, no one is giving any sort of real draft compensation for Zach Wilson at this point. And you are then going to have to eat the fact that you took him number 2 overall and you got absolutely nothing for him in return. So I wonder if that was kind of where their mindset was. They didn't want to spend any money because they already had a lot of their cap kind of tied up in this current winning window with Aaron Rodgers. So they didn't want to do that anyways. But I wonder if they also just wanted to try to prop up Wilson's trade value as much as possible to maybe at the end of the day be able to say, see, we drafted him at second overall. It didn't work out, but at least we got like a third round pick back for him. And that's not so bad. And we had the Rodgers window and everybody kind of forgets about it anyways. To your original question, though, are there better options than Zach Wilson that were available for the Jets to go after? The answer is yes. That is just kind of my maybe devil's advocate, trying to put myself in their shoes of why they didn't do that, because it looks bad now. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I don't hate. I think they were in a tough. I mean, obviously they were in a tough spot, right? Rodgers goes down. That was the entire offseason was this project, the Aaron Rodgers thing. So they were screwed the moment that happened. I'm kind of fine with the idea of, look, we didn't want to do this, but Zach Wilson is our best option right now. And I think it probably was. They were in a similar spot. We talked about it. There was no magic bullet, no silver bullet here to fix all this. You just had to roll with it. But I think at some point between then and now, there was an obvious realization, and this kept coming up every week. Like, Zach Wilson's not the guy, right? It's not going to work with him.
Right.
What are you going to do? And every step of the way, they've kind of been like, no, Zach, we're going to keep going with Zach. We're not bringing in competition. Like, Zach's the guy. But at some point, it's like, actually, because we're good enough. Like, we're good enough that even with Zach Wilson, we can skirt around 500 and be in the hunt if we just try and upgrade from him slightly, which doesn't even cost that much money. Draft picks with the Josh Dobbs type of deal, we could potentially be even better than that and buy ourselves some breathing space and actually have a shot at this. I feel like they've been so sort of stubbornly sticking with the Zach Wilson thing as if there were no other options and there was no possibility of upgrading that position. And it's potentially cost them the season because they may end up being 1 or 2 games off where they need to be. And the difference between those 1 or 2 games could be a Josh Dobbs over a Zach Wilson or whoever else might have been, available.
Yeah, clearly you look at it now, and it's very easy to say they made the wrong choice. And maybe they made the wrong choice all along. Like I said, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes of why they wouldn't have done this. Because you could say to yourself, well, maybe they didn't really know that Josh Dobbs was that available because Josh Dobbs had just been starting for the Cardinals, and he'd been fine for the Cardinals. Maybe they didn't know he was available. Well, if you didn't do that, then you weren't paying attention. You weren't actually keeping your ears to the ground for what you could hear going on around the rest of the league. So that's not really a good excuse. The only 2 realistic excuses that I can come up with are the scenario that I painted where they didn't want to spend any more money and they wanted to try to increase his trade value when it came to this offseason. Or maybe this guy looks really good in practice, and just when the games come on, he's just not good. And I don't know if that's the case or not, but to me, those are the only 2 realistic defenses as to why you did not go out and bring anyone else in at this point, because it's hard to believe that there wasn't an upgrade. And Josh Dobbs I don't want to act like the Josh Dobbs thing was like, oh yeah, anybody could have had that. It's a special thing what Josh Dobbs did this past weekend, and I think that it should be recognized that. So I don't want to say oh yeah, if the Jets would have brought in any quarterback, they would have been able to do what Josh Dobbs did. But it is pretty shocking that they haven't tried harder to do that.
So because they won, because Zach Wilson didn't play well, because the Jets offense got nothing working, and because their defense was outstanding, it's kind of going to fly under the radar that Justin Herbert had another not particularly good game and is now recording his worst ever PFF grade over a season. Right now he's at 74.4 for the year. That's down 3 grading points over last year, where, remember, he was playing with a busted rib for the majority of the year. So, what is wrong with Justin Herbert right now?
He's got a healthy rib, right?
Yes.
He's got if he busts the rib, then he...
Oh, you're saying that's what's wrong with him? He's healthy?
That was the correlation causation that I got right there, right?
He does have a busted finger. I mean, he's not healthy. There's something wrong with him, right?
No, I feel like it's just the Chargers overall right now. It's just not really taking that next step, and I don't know if it's pressure mounting on the coaching staff and the expectations and all this kinds of stuff, but it just doesn't look crisp. It just doesn't look clean. I think that losing Mike Williams obviously hurts. Quentin Johnson not being able to come in and fill that role the way he needs to definitely hurts. Relying on Keenan Allen as much as they do week in and week out, given his age and how much I think that his athleticism has just overall kind of declined is kind of crazy that he continues to be without question the top option on this team. So it just feels like a group that overall across the board is not playing to its potential. And Herbert is in on that. I'm not saying that he deserves all the blame. As we all know, quarterbacks get way too much of the praise. They get way too much of the blame. But it just feels as though this is an offense that is not clicking the way that it needs to. And the team has felt out of sync all year. When the offense is playing well, defense isn't playing well. When the defense is playing well, the offense isn't playing well. And it got them a win last night against a putrid offense that they went up against. But you take away that special team score that they got early in the game, and not a ton of things went right for the Chargers. So
it's funny. You look at their passing, just the target numbers, much as Peyton Manning wants to eliminate targets as a stat. Keenan Allen.
Wait, does he?
Yeah. He hates it.
Why?
He thinks it's the root cause of all wide receiver drama, essentially, is as soon as we started tracking how often the ball is going towards certain receivers, that's where every wide receiver now is focused on, where are my targets? Give me the ball. So Peyton Manning wants to eliminate targets as a concept. Doesn't want to track it.
When did we start tracking targets?
I don't know.
Because I feel like wide receivers have been demanding that you get the ball in their hands before we started tracking targets.
Right. I mean, I don't know that there were readily available target numbers before PFF existed, so probably the early 2000s.
I'm going to look it up.
Okay. Anyway, getting back to where I was going, Keenan Allen had 9 targets. Nobody else had more than 5, and that was Austin Eckler. And then after Eckler, Quentin Johnson had 3, and then there's a bunch of people with 2 or 1. I mean, this was an offense that was like, get Keenan Allen the ball. If Keenan's not open, we're going to dump it off to Eckler. And if neither of those 2 things is happening, we're dead. The play is done. Like, we're toast. That's not going to work.
I agree completely. And I think this stinks for Quentin Johnson, because this should have been his opportunity, right? There's too many other really good young receivers around the NFL who are able to contribute when their number has been called in their rookie season. And not just this year, like it's every single year. When you get picked in the first round, okay, yeah, not every player is the same. I'll be the first one to tell you that. Like, sometimes guys just take a little bit longer. You know, sometimes they're year 2, year 3 breakout candidates. But receiver, it gets particularly hard because there are so many examples of receivers who are able to play really well early on in their NFL careers that it's tough to see Johnston not only not kind of crack the lineup more than you wanted to at the beginning of the year, but now there are targets to be had. Like, now there is a major opportunity. There is a void that needs to be filled, and it feels like they're just not going his way. And I think I was on this show, I don't remember if it was last week or the week before. I watched a lot of Quinn Johnson snaps. I went back and I watched it because I was like, man, why aren't they getting this guy the ball? He's playing fine. Like, I think he's playing fine. They just don't really trust him. Like, there's not a lot of plays that are designed for him.
Right.
The ones that are pretty simple stuff. Like, it's drag concepts. It's things that are very easy to get the ball in his hands. When he is running those vertical routes, it's very clear that they just don't want to look his way or don't make him a primary. And I wonder if that's because he's not having a lot of success in those areas in practice. And so, okay, he's running these routes, and I think that, all right, maybe he's running it with good speed. He's getting leverage. He's even with a player. You can go throw them the ball. You can give him a 50-50 chance. But there's just not a lot of that in the offense. So I wonder why that's the case.
I mean, I will say, yesterday in particular, the Jets were basically matching him up one-on-one with Sauce Gardner, at which point, I mean, it makes sense that he's not going to get much joy, right? Like, Gardner is not only one of the best corners in the NFL, but is also the exact perfect body type to shut down a receiver like Quentin Johnson. Like, if you were building a corner in a lab to stop Quentin Johnston, it would look like Sauce Gardner. And
you're right.
The Jets already have one of those, so they just deployed him on Johnston and said, game over. And, I think the first pass or one of the first passing plays of the game for the Chargers was like a shot at Sauce Gardner, Quentin Johnson, no shot, like blanketed, shut down.
Right.
Sauce breaks it up, and you're like, all right, that's probably not do too much of that for the rest of the game, and they didn't. The other thing, so as much as the Jets' pass rush is amazing, correspondingly, the Chargers' offensive line kind of got its ass kicked. I can't remember too many games where Rashawn Slater has given up 8 pressures. But on the other side of the ball,
I just want to say before we get to the other side of the ball, that play that you referenced earlier where Jermaine Johnson got the sack on a 3-man rush, I think he did get that full sack. But if you go watch that play, Bryce Huff goes straight into Rashawn Slater's chest and sled pushes him back 3 full yards.
Yeah,
like that was a catalyst for that sack because when I saw that play, I was like, that can't be Rashawn Slater. Somebody else has got to be in the game, and he was. The Chargers offensive line also did not play well, but the Jets defense.
Yeah, I mean the Jets defensive line absolutely destroyed them, but we'd been kind of critical of the Chargers' defensive pass rush for a while, and they really showed up. I mean, Khalil Mack had 9 pressures. Joey Bosa had another phenomenal game. Tuli Peloto had a great game. They had a bunch of other guys get chip in with 4 or 5 pressures as well. Like, both pass rushes were amazing. Obviously, the difference being that the Chargers' pass rush was going up against this bad Jets offensive line, so it made more sense for that to happen.
Yeah, but you got to see it from Bosa, right? I think you and I have talked about it before on this show that Bosa looked like a shell of himself,
right,
through the first half of the season. And last 2 weeks, he's had 5 total pressures, 6 total pressures, 23.8 pass rush win percentage, 25% pass rush win percentage. So, you're going up against 2 of the lower tier offensive lines in the NFL, in the Bears and the Jets. In those back-to-back weeks, he's been playing well. But the sign of a guy being truly cooked is when you have those matchups and you can't perform that way. So at least Bosa is showing that he is not completely cooked, because when those favorable opportunities are showing up, he is capitalizing on that. Now, you want to see him as what we've believed for a while is one of the better long pass rushers in the NFL. You got to do it against some of the better offensive tackles in the NFL. So that's kind of to be seen, but at least it's nice to see him dominate the teams that he should dominate.